In the early 17th century, European politics and diplomacy were often intertwined with marriage alliances between royal families. One of the most notable, yet ultimately failed attempts at such an alliance was the Spanish match, the intended marriage between Charles I of England and the Spanish Infanta Maria Ana of Spain. This diplomatic initiative aimed to unite the Catholic and Protestant realms of Spain and England and resolve long-standing conflicts. While it was pursued with high hopes by King James I of England and his closest advisor, George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, the marriage negotiations eventually collapsed, leading to significant consequences for both the English monarchy and society. By the early 17th century, Europe was rife with political, religious, and military tensions. England was a Protestant nation under the Stuart dynasty, while Spain, under the Habsburgs, was one of the strongest Catholic powers. The two countries had previously been enemies, most notably during the Anglo-Spanish War, which ended with the Treaty of London. Although this treaty brought peace, relations remained uneasy. King James I, eager to secure stability and peace for his kingdom, saw a marriage alliance with Spain as a way to bring England closer to Catholic Europe and reduce the possibility of future conflicts. Additionally, James hoped the marriage would lead to economic benefits, including trade agreements, and provide a substantial dowry to aid England's finances. James I's vision for European diplomacy was rooted in the idea of interfaith peace. A marriage between Charles, his son, and the Spanish Infanta could bridge the Catholic-Protestant divide, facilitating a diplomatic equilibrium in Europe. Despite resistance from English Protestants who viewed Catholic Spain with suspicion, James believed that a personal alliance with a Catholic princess could moderate religious tensions and establish England as a mediator in the broader religious conflicts in Europe. However, opposition in England grew, especially among Puritans and Parliament, who feared that such a union would endanger Protestantism within England. The idea of the Spanish match was first considered in 1614, when James I opened discussions with Spanish diplomats. Both countries expressed cautious interest, but negotiations quickly stalled due to differing religious requirements. The Spanish monarchy insisted that Prince Charles convert to Catholicism, or at the very least, allow for substantial Catholic freedoms in England. James I, unwilling to agree to such conditions publicly, paused the discussions. The English court, especially Puritans and Parliament, expressed opposition to the alliance, fearing the influence of Catholicism over English governance. By 1623, however, James I revived his aspirations for the Spanish match. His confidant and favourite, George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, urged Charles to personally visit Spain in a bold gesture of commitment to the alliance. The journey, which was planned in secrecy, saw Charles and Buckingham travel incognito to Madrid. Their arrival shocked the Spanish court, but it initially invigorated the marriage discussions. Charles and Buckingham, however, faced delays and setbacks as the Spanish royal family demanded strict conditions, including assurances of Catholic rights in England and a papal dispensation. Furthermore, the Infanta's brother, King Philip IV of Spain, was reluctant to let his sister marry into a Protestant royal family without absolute guarantees of religious concessions. Negotiations in Madrid ultimately collapsed in 1624 due to both religious and political disagreements. The Spanish court insisted that England make concessions that would protect Catholics in England, and even proposed delaying the marriage until the English monarchy could secure these conditions. Frustrated and insulted by the Spanish demands, Charles and Buckingham abandoned their efforts, returning to England empty-handed. This failure severely embarrassed James I, who had invested significant political capital in the marriage alliance, and it damaged Anglo-Spanish relations. The failure of the Spanish match heightened anti-Spanish sentiment in England, leading to public outcry and mistrust toward the Catholic powers of Europe. Parliament, which had long opposed the Spanish alliance, became increasingly critical of James I's foreign policy, viewing it as an unnecessary and dangerous dalliance with Catholicism. The debacle further entrenched Protestant values and anti-Catholic rhetoric in English society, reinforcing the perception of Catholicism as a threat to English religious and political independence. This resentment was reflected in the House of Commons, where members openly criticised James I and Buckingham. Their protests were not only against the failed marriage itself, but also against the perceived threat that closer ties with Spain posed to English Protestantism. Parliament's criticisms created a significant rift between the monarchy and the legislative body, foreshadowing conflicts that would continue into Charles I's reign. Following the collapse of the Spanish match, England's foreign policy shifted dramatically. Parliament pressured James I to take a more aggressive stance against Spain, reflecting popular support for Protestant alliances. Subsequently, in 1624, England entered into an alliance with France and other Protestant states, paving the way for involvement in the 30 Years' War. Although James I had long resisted English military involvement in European conflicts, the failure of the Spanish match and the influence of Parliament pushed England closer to war with Spain. This change in foreign policy, driven by the unsuccessful marriage alliance, set the stage for prolonged Anglo-Spanish hostilities and involved England in the complex religious wars that plagued Europe in the early 17th century. These conflicts strained England's finances and raised questions about the role of the monarchy in foreign policy decisions, as Parliament grew increasingly vocal about the nation's military and diplomatic priorities. The Spanish match debacle further damaged the already tense relationship between James I and Parliament, highlighting significant differences in their views on foreign policy and religious tolerance. Parliament, which had long advocated for a Protestant-oriented foreign policy, became increasingly distrustful of James's pro-Spanish diplomacy. The resulting discontent fostered a climate of opposition toward the monarchy, culminating in increased calls for greater parliamentary oversight of royal policies. This tension carried over into the reign of Charles I, who, after assuming the throne, faced immediate challenges in his interactions with Parliament. Charles inherited not only his father's throne, but also the political dissatisfaction that had been brewing over the Spanish match. His reliance on advisers such as Buckingham, combined with his resistance to parliamentary influence, eventually led to the dissolution of Parliament in 1629 and the subsequent personal rule during which Charles governed without parliamentary consultation. The failed Spanish match and the subsequent anti-Catholic sentiment left a lasting impact on English society. The English public, especially Protestant factions, became increasingly wary of any perceived Catholic influence on the monarchy. This anti-Catholic sentiment permeated society, resulting in stricter laws against Catholics and heightened surveillance of Catholic activities. English Puritans, who'd long been suspicious of James I's religious policies, grew more vocal in their calls for Protestant reforms, setting the stage for later religious conflicts within England. Additionally, the collapse of the Spanish match solidified a cultural association between Catholicism and foreign dominance, fueling xenophobia and reinforcing the notion of England as a bastion of Protestantism. These religious attitudes would influence English policies and public opinion for decades, shaping both domestic governance and England's stance toward European Catholic powers. The Spanish match, initially intended as a bridge between Catholic Spain and Protestant England, ultimately became a source of division and conflict. Despite James I's aspirations for a dynastic alliance that could pacify religious tensions in Europe, the proposed marriage between Charles I and the Spanish Infanta proved politically and diplomatically unsustainable. The collapse of the Spanish match emboldened anti-Catholic sentiments, strained the relationship between the monarchy and Parliament, and led to a shift in England's foreign policy. While the Spanish match is often remembered as a failed diplomatic episode, its consequences reverberated through English society and government. It influenced the English monarchy's approach to international alliances, underscored the deep-rooted religious tensions of the time, and contributed to the growing discontent between the monarchy and Parliament. The effects of the Spanish match would shape the political landscape of England, contributing to the eventual conflicts and civil strife that characterized Charles I's reign. In this way, the failed marriage that was never meant to be became a pivotal moment in English history, one that underscored the complexities of diplomacy, religion and power in early modern Europe.